Hi guys, and happy 2025! I can't believe we're saying 2025 already. That is insane to me. I'm having a very slow and relaxed and completely unpressured start to the new year. I really do think the year begins in spring. I'm not putting any pressure on myself to jump into any crazy new habits from day one. So with that being said, I thought the perfect first video of the year would be a cozy book club video. So I am reading Little Women as my first read of the year, and we are going to do a full cover to cover read in this video. I've actually never read Little Women before, so this is gonna be my first time, complete first impressions. I don't know why it's taken me this long to get round to it. There just has always been something else at the top of my TBR list, but I've always wanted to read it, so we're finally doing it, and it's winter, it's cozy, it's currently snowing outside, so it's the perfect time to read it. So you're gonna get my full first read thoughts on this. It is going to be a spoiler full video, so if you have not read it yet and you don't know what happens and you don't want any spoilers, I would recommend going away and reading the book first and then coming back to this video and then comparing notes about what we thought. I have also not watched the movie either, because I really wanted to read the book first so I could get my full first impressions with the books and then watch the movie once I finished. So I have obviously the vaguest idea of what happens, but I really am going into this blind as a complete first time read. So I'm going to spend this next week or so, however long it takes me to read it, reading Little Women, and then I'm going to have a movie night and probably watch both of the Little Women films back to back just to top off the experience. So we're going to be spending the week together. I'm going to be updating you as I go with my thoughts and how I'm feeling and my impressions, and it's just going to be a very cozy week. So I hope you are excited to join me. I hope you've got a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever drink you like. If not, go and make one and let's do some reading, shall we? I am loving it so far. It's so cozy and wonderful. It would be perfect to start this right before Christmas, because it actually starts in the book just before Christmas and all the girls are deciding what presents they want to buy, and then in chapter 2 you have Christmas Day where they spend all morning reading, which was just lovely, and then they decide to God, you will have to excuse my voice, it's early in the morning and I've not really spoken yet today. But yeah, on Christmas morning, the girls spend all morning reading, which is lovely, and then they decide to give their breakfast away to a poor family, and that was just so wholesome and nice to read. There was a passage in chapter 2 that I absolutely loved. It said, "There was a good deal of laughing and kissing and explaining in the simple loving fashion which makes these home festivals so pleasant at the time, so sweet to remember long afterwards." Which, if that does not perfectly sum up Christmas mornings, I don't know what does. And then we've just had the New Year's Eve party, which was so much fun to read about. Jo met Laurie properly for the first time when they were both hiding behind a curtain, trying to avoid dancing. That gave me Eloise from Bridgerton vibes so much. And it was really nice to see them making friends, and then obviously Meg sprained her ankle and they had to go home in the carriage, but So far it's just been such a fun, like cozy, wholesome start to the book. I just finished chapter 4 and we see Meg and Joe go off to their jobs. I wasn't actually sure if they were working or not. I feel like it wasn't obviously clear, even though we do know they're a poor family. Even though they're a poor family, I guess it's, you know, insinuated that they would have to work in some way, or would have to work eventually, but yeah, I didn't know if they had started working yet or not, but they have. So we see them go off to their jobs. Meg is a governess and Joe works in Aunt March's house, helping her because she's a bit more elderly and a bit less able and a bit less well. So Joe works in Aunt March's house, and oh my goodness, the library in Aunt March's house sounds absolutely magical. I wish I could go and see that library. Obviously Aunt March herself is not entirely pleasant, but it sounds like the ability to go to that library every day and experience that and have access to those books and that environment is well worth it for Joe. So I think we've got to know the girls a bit better at this point, and this is my summary of them so far. So Meg is the eldest. She has the most memories of when the family used to have money. So she misses it the most. She wants to be a lady, she wants to live a life of luxury, she doesn't want to work, she wants to be able to just enjoy her days as she pleases. So she is struggling with that at the moment. Jo is the second eldest. She's a little bit of a rebel. She doesn't really like being a lady. She would much prefer to be a gentleman because she thinks that boys have much more fun and are able to do more things, read more things, play more games, do more jobs that she would like to do. So she's sort of chafing against womanhood, I guess we could call it. She loves to read, she loves to write, she desperately wants to do something important, but she's not quite sure what that is or what that would look like yet. Then I keep forgetting who's older out of Beth or Amy. I think they're quite close in age. I think Amy is the next eldest, although there's quite a big jump between Meg and Jo and then Beth and Amy. So we've got Amy, who is a little lady. She's quite accomplished, she's very proper, she's quite well liked, she loves to draw, and she does not like her nose. That's her big worldly problem as it stands, is that I think Jo dropped her when she was young, and it's done something, it's affected her nose and it's a little bit more flat. She wishes it was more upturned. So that's Amy's biggest problem right now. And then we've got Beth, who is an absolute angel, lovely and sweet, but very reserved and shy, does not want to go to school, does not want to be out of the house, just wants to stay at home, make house, be with her family. So still very much loving the just cozy, welcoming, wholesome world of this book, and can't wait to carry on reading. have just finished chapter 5. I've been reading little parts aloud to Sika and she seems to be thoroughly enjoying it as well. So in this chapter, Joe's visited Laurie for the first time in his house while he's sick, and it's really, it feels like the sort of blossoming of their really nice friendship. It feels like the blossoming of their really nice friendship. I'm not actually sure if Laurie's like illness now is just sort of a one-off thing, or if it's going to be a sort of recurrent thing, if he's got some kind of like long-standing illness, because he is described as being quite thin and delicate, and yeah, I'm not sure if he's got some, like, if he's got a condition and he's got a long illness or something wrong with him, or if this is just like a one-off, he's just sick type of thing. I'm hoping I'm hoping it's just a one-off for him, bless him, because he seems lovely and the friendship that's developing between him and Joe is lovely to read so far as well. I have a sneaky suspicion that those two will end up together, and I think it's going to be Laurie that develops the feelings first and advances the relationship. I think Joe's feelings will develop long before, either long before Joe has them, before she's aware that she has them, or before she wants to have them. I think she's just going to go into this as a purely platonic friendship, and I think Laurie will end up liking her a little bit more than that. That's my suspicions. So on with chapter 6. Okay, that's chapter 6 done as well. We've seen a lot more of the older Mr. Lawrence in this chapter, and he is lovely. I'm imagining him like, I could never remember the actor's name. The actor, specifically the character of Scrooge from the Muppets Christmas Carol, after, you know, at the end of the movie when he was all lovely and friendly. That's how I'm imagining Mr. Lawrence. That's how he looks in my head, as the nice friendly Scrooge from Muppets Christmas Carol. He is just the sweetest old man ever, and in this chapter his friendship with Beth has developed, which was so heartwarming to read, because not only is Beth coming out of her skin a little bit, making a friend and being a bit braver, but Mr. Lawrence has a lovely new companion, and he gifts her a little piano after she's been to his house and played on his piano every day, and yeah, just the sweetest. So far this whole book has just been the loveliest, most wholesome, cozy little story ever. Okay, I've just done chapter 7, which is the chapter where we see Amy at school, and it's our biggest insight into her character so far. She asks her sister for money to buy some pickled limes. I've been trying to figure out if I think that sounds nice or not. pickled limes. But she asked her sister for money to get some anyway, because that is the currency at the minute with the young girls. They trade them, they give them for status and favours, and it's the currency of the day. But they are banned. So she sneaks in a lot, and there's a girl that snubbed her before that now wants some limes, and she refuses her, so this girl tells on her to the teacher, and Amy gets in trouble. And it's, I think, the most trouble she's ever been in, and a little bit probably more of a severe punishment than was warranted. And she is absolutely mortified. It's probably one of the worst things that's happened to her up to this point in her life, and she goes home and she doesn't want to go back to school anymore, which apparently in those days you had a choice about. So she won't be going back to school, at least for the foreseeable future. So yeah, just a really nice little insight into Amy in this chapter. Okay, just finished chapter 8, and that was a big one. I was angry reading this. So Joe's gone off to the theatre, and Amy really wanted to come, and Joe wouldn't let her because she didn't really want like her baby sister trailing after her, so she makes her stay at home. Amy's really mad, and Amy burns a book. Hi. Hello. So Amy's really mad, and she burns a book that Joe's been writing, and that's the only copy she had of it, and she'd been working on it for so long, and it's just gone. And obviously Joe was mad, I was mad, because as a fellow writer I know what would have gone into that. And I do think it's a bit different than drawing. I feel like writing, it just feels like when you've lost it, you're never gonna get that back, and you could remember, you know, the story, but you're never gonna be able to write it in exactly the same way twice. And oh, I like the secondhand rage I felt was incredible. But what I think I'm learning with this is that it is truly a book full of lessons for little women, for young women to learn. And I think in this case it's about controlling your anger, or not controlling it, but not letting your anger spiral out of control and cause you to do bad things in turn. So the mother advises Joe on the day that it happens to not let the sun set on her anger, and Joe is just so mad, and she's like, no, I'm angry, I'm rightly angry, I'm not making up with her. She goes to bed really cross, and Amy has sort of realised that she's made a mistake, but doesn't necessarily want to sort of grovel, or doesn't think that that's going to work. So she's trying to think of ways to make friends with Joe, and then Joe and Laurie go ice skating, and Amy decides to follow them and just hope that she can just sort of work her way into this nice day they're having, and then everything will be fine, because Joe's always in a much better mood when she's with Laurie, and she thinks this will be a good way to smooth it over. And when Joe realises that Amy's followed them, she's still really angry, and you just know, you know something bad's gonna happen. And there's a passage in here about when you let your anger sort of consume you and what that feels like, and I thought it was spot on. She had cherished her anger till it grew strong and took possession of her, as evil thoughts and feelings always do unless cast out at once. And that is just such a lovely way to put it. If you can almost cherish and like the idea of feeling angry, especially if you feel like you're just in your anger, and if you hold on to it, and if you enjoy being angry, it really does just take a hold of you and spiral into something that you can't control. And I think that was a lovely way of putting it. And then yes, as I was suspecting, Amy does fall through the ice, and thankfully she's fine. They managed to get her out, get her home, get her warmed up. everything's okay, but it really shakes Jo, and that message then for her really hits home about not holding on to your anger because you just don't know what's going to happen, and it's not worth leaving things with someone on a cross note. So after Amy's all settled at home and warmed up and asleep, Jo's really shaken, and it leads to a lovely conversation between her and her mother, where her mother sort of confides that she's always struggled with her temper as well, and it's sort of quite like a nice touching bonding moment for them, something that they have in common. And Jo asked her how she dealt with it, and she said she didn't really have a way to deal with it until she had her children, and then she realised sort of the gravity of what being their role model meant, and that they would sort of look to her as the example of the woman to become. So she realised that she had to be the woman that she would want her daughters to grow up to be. And then the other thing that she talked about was finding strength and comfort in God, and it was a really, really lovely description and passage. I really enjoyed the way that she spoke about it. She says, "My child, the troubles and temptations of your life are beginning and may be many, but you can overcome and outlive them all if you learn to feel the strength and tenderness of your Heavenly Father as you do that of your earthly one. The more you love and trust him, the nearer you will feel to him, and the less you will depend on human power and wisdom. His love and care never tire or change, can never be taken from you, but may become the source of lifelong peace, happiness, and strength. Believe this heartily, and go to God with all your little cares, hopes, and sins and sorrows, as freely and confidingly as you come to your mother." And that was just lovely. It was one of those passages that I read, and then I was like, I'm so glad that I've read that, and I have these words now to refer back to and give me some guidance and comfort. Good morning. I've just finished chapter 9, which I think is the longest chapter by far. They are quite varied in length, and this one was a big old one, and it felt like a real turning point in the story, especially for Meg. It's the one where she goes away for a fortnight with some of her friends that have a lot more money, and they're obviously a similar age, but they are a lot more worldly than Meg is, and their parents, I guess, are a lot more schemy, and these other girls are already thinking along the lines of prospects and marriage and grown-up life, whereas up until this point Meg has been firmly in her childhood. I think she's 17 at this point, around that age anyway, but she has not wanted to grow up. She's been firmly stuck in her childhood and happy that way. She doesn't want to break out of that little bubble just yet, but then she goes away for a fortnight with these friends who have very much sort of come out into society and are thinking that way, and it's a real eye-opener for Meg, and the first time in her life where she's listened to more adult conversations, both those she's been included in and conversations she's overheard that she wasn't supposed to. People talking about her prospects and whether her mother's got any plans for her, and it really does open her eyes and make her reevaluate her place in the world for the first time, and whether she's ready to become a woman. And she has to listen to all this gossip and try and work through it while she's away for herself, and she really struggles with it because she's not had those kind of grown-up thoughts or conversations necessarily before. But the nice thing is She goes through all this internal sort of battle while she's away, and then goes home and has a really nice, honest conversation with her mother about it, and with Joe. Joe's old enough to be included in the conversation, and I think that's lovely because these girls do have things that they struggle with, but they're always honest about them. If they've done something wrong, if they're not sure about something, they always go home and talk to their family about it and talk to their mother about it, and are very honest about what happened and what they thought about it. And I think that's a lovely part of the story. And then the mum, particularly in this point, Mrs. March really reminded me of Violet Bridgerton, the mum in the Bridgertons, and I'm wondering how much Violet Bridgerton was inspired by Mrs. March. They give very much the same just lovely motherly energy, and she talks to the girls about marriage and what she hopes for them for marriage, and it's a really lovely conversation. And I think a very similar conversation happened in Bridgerton in the first season, where Violet's talking to Daphne, and basically what the mother's saying is, I have the absolute highest hopes and aspirations for you for marriage, but not in terms of wealth, not in terms of titles, but in terms of love. I want you to be loved and be cherished and have a love marriage, and not marriage for prospects or anything else, because you won't have a happy life that way. And it was just a really nice, touching conversation. I want my daughters to be beautiful, accomplished and good, to be admired, loved and respected, to have a happy youth, to be well and wisely married, and to lead useful, pleasant lives with as little care and sorrow to try them as God sees fit to send. To be loved and chosen by a good man is the best and sweetest thing which can happen to a woman, and I sincerely hope my girls may know this beautiful experience. It is natural to think of it, Meg, right to hope for it and wait for it, and wise to prepare for it, so that when the happy time comes, you may feel ready for the duties and worthy of the joy. My dear girls, I am ambitious for you, but not to have you make a dash into the world, marry rich men merely because they are rich, or have splendid houses, which are not homes because love is wanting. Money is a needful and precious thing, and when well used, a noble thing, but I never want you to think it is the first or only prize to strive for. I'd rather see you poor men's wives if you are happy, beloved, contented, than queens on thrones without self-respect and peace. We all need a Mrs. March in our lives, don't we? Okay, I've just done chapter 10 and oh my gosh, how utterly charming is chapter 10. It's springtime, the girls are out in their garden. They've divided their garden up into 4 little sections so they can each do their own garden how they want it. And I've been trying to decide whose garden was my favourite. They all sounded just lovely. I think it's a close toss-up between Amy or Meg's at the minute for me, and I don't know who sounded better. I want to see them all, and I want a Little Women garden now. What an absolutely perfect spring. Let's all agree to have a Little Women spring this year. They were spending their days gardening, going for walks, rowing on the river, going for flower hunts. That just sounds like the absolutely perfect spring to me. And then to top it off, they had a secret society, which is just absolute goals. Yeah, so just a charming chapter, and just absolute inspiration and goals for spring in that one. That's chapter 11 done. It's summertime now and the girls have a break from work, so they're experimenting with a week of doing nothing but play. Not even any work at home, just having their complete week, no responsibility, no chores, no work, just whatever they want to do. And their mother, Mrs. March, is letting them do this as an experiment because she thinks it'll be a very good lesson to learn. And although they don't want to admit it right away, they do very quickly feel that it just doesn't feel good. Too much free time, too much idle time, not enough work. It's just not good for the soul, and they don't have a good week at all, bless them. And I think I said a couple of chapters ago, this book just seems to be chock full of really good life lessons, especially for young women, and the one in this chapter is big focusing on idle hands and how detrimental it can be, although tempting, to just kick back and not do anything. It just doesn't feel good, and doing good honest work is just good for the soul, isn't it? So I think that's the lesson from this chapter. I've just finished chapters 12 and 13. In chapter 12 we are well and truly in summertime. Laurie is hosting Camp Lawrence, which the girls go to, and some of Laurie's English friends. Mr. Brooke goes as well, and Ned Moffat, who I think is just going to see Meg, but she doesn't particularly pay him any attention, so he leaves quite disgruntled. And they play this game where they basically take it in turns. One person will tell a bit of a story and leave on a cliffhanger, and the next person picks it up and carries on the story, and they go round. And Mr. Brooks starts it, and I think his little story is quite telling of his feelings for Meg. I think he might like her a little bit, and I think she is entirely oblivious. Although I do think perhaps Meg might end up with Mr. Brooke. It'll be a very long way off for her. At the minute she is not thinking romance at all, but I can see them ending up together, and if it's not Mr. Brooke, I can see Meg ending up marrying someone who maybe is poor or doesn't have that much money. Because this book is so full of lessons, I think the lesson for Meg to learn and the thing for her to overcome is her desire for wealth. And I think part of her journey will be realising that money isn't everything, and that she will be happier marrying for love, even if that means marrying someone that doesn't necessarily have a lot of money, as opposed to just prioritising
wealth. So I can see them ending up together. I think maybe that might be where this is going. And then in chapter 13, we see Laurie follows the girls into the woods, and he's quite miffed at first that they haven't invited him on their little day out. And then he finds out he's stumbled into their, I think they called it like a busy bee society. And it's also sort of part of their pilgrim's progress that they're doing. And they've gone out to the woods and they're all doing something, whether it's sewing or writing or reading, whatever, that they're doing things to develop skills or sharpen their minds, whatever it might be. And he stumbles into this, and they agree that he can join in if he keeps himself busy. And I think that's really good for Laurie, because Laurie tends to struggle with idleness and not really doing much of anything with his days. He's quite aimless a lot of the times when he's not with the girls, and then that aimlessness often leads him to feel quite grumpy and frustrated. And I think that the girls have already learnt their lesson about idle hands and the benefits, the good benefits of good work. And I think that's something that they can teach to Larry, is the benefits of working hard. And I think a lot of Larry's frustrations just come from his sort of aimlessness and not really knowing what to do. So I think the girls are a very good influence on him.
Just finished chapter 14, which was a really good one, actually. One of my favourites so far, I think. And I think it's because I'm so invested in Jo's journey as a fellow writer, because we start off and it's a bit mysterious. It's all a bit, ooh, who's doing what? I don't normally talk to anyone this early, so let's try and get thoughts into words out of my mouth and tell you about this somewhat coherently. So, starts off a little bit mysteriously. Jo has snuck away with 2 of her stories to a newspaper publishing house because she's going to try and get them published, but she doesn't want to tell anyone until they've been published in case they get rejected. So she snuck away, and I'm super invested in that. As a fellow writer, I'm hooked on Jo's little story. And then she bumps into Laurie, who has a conversation with her about Meg's missing glove that she lost a few chapters back. And Laurie tells Jo, who has the other glove, someone kept it on purpose. And this someone likes Meg, and we don't get to know at this point who it is, but I have my suspicions, and I think it's going to turn out to be Mr. Brooke. And the conversation makes Jo very angry, not necessarily because of who has the glove, but because she doesn't want anyone to come along and marry Meg and take Meg away from her. So she's not going to be happy with any suitors for the foreseeable future. So she's really quite cross about it, and she doesn't know what to do and whether to talk to Meg and how to stop Meg from leaving, basically. Because Jo also, as Meg had been struggling with this earlier in the book, Jo wants to stay a little girl for as long as possible and does not want to grow up, does not want to get married, does not want her sisters to grow up and get married and leave the house. And honestly, I just think it's quite refreshing. Jo, I think, is like 16, 17. Meg is 17, 18, I'm pretty sure at this time. And it's just so lovely and refreshing, because I feel like nowadays there's such a rush for young girls to grow up and become women, and they want to grow up as fast as they can, and they want to wear stylish grown-up clothes and put makeup on and start dating, and there's such a rush for it nowadays. And it's so lovely and refreshing that there's these 2 like older teenage girls that really just don't want that at all, and they just want to stay young and carefree and play games and not have to be women or grown-ups for as long as possible. And I'm finding it very lovely and very refreshing so far. Right, that is chapter 15 and 16 done. First of all, chapter 15, first line, November is the most disagreeable month in the whole year. Hard disagree. November is actually one of my favourite months of the year. It always has the best weather, the best lighting. Autumn here where we live is truly peaking in November. It's one of the most beautiful months of the year. So hard disagree on that. It was all of a sudden a very heavy and emotional chapter. They got word that Mr. March is very ill and they've sent for Mrs. March to go to him immediately. So it's been very shocking for them all. Very, very sad. It was a bit of a lump in your throat to read kind of chapter. Mr. Brooke has volunteered to travel to Washington with Mrs. March so that she doesn't have to go on her own, and I think that has massively warmed Meg to him and will do him a lot of favours where that's concerned. And obviously the family's a little bit strapped for cash, so Aunt March has sent some money as well as her thoughts on the matter. But Jo decides that she wants to do something. Now is her chance to take action and finally do something. So she goes off and she ends up cutting all her hair off and selling it for £25, which sounds like that was quite a lot of money at the time. I think it was quite liberating for Jo initially, this cutting off of her hair, because she's always sort of rejected femininity and womanhood and everything that that encompasses, and I suppose her hair would really represent that, and I think it was quite a liberating thing for her to do, just to go and chop it all off. But she does find it quite shocking, I think a bit more shocking than she expected to, and though she wouldn't admit it to the whole family, she very quietly mourns the loss of her hair, and as they refer to it, the loss of her one beauty. I think she's happy she did it, but also found it much more shocking and difficult to process than she imagined. And then chapter 16, Mrs. March departs for Washington with Mr. Brooke, and the girls are all very sad, obviously worried about their father and sad they're going to be missing their mother while she's away, but they've learned a great deal since the start of the book. But they're determined to stay busy and stay useful and try and stay in the best frame of mind that they can, so they commit themselves to working really hard and keeping everything running really well whilst their mother's away. And in this chapter we got to read a lot of the letters, mostly to Mrs. March and their dad, keeping up with their progress that way, which was quite a nice little insight into how each of them is doing and feeling and thinking. So it was a sort of bittersweet little chapter to read. Okay, I've just done chapter 17 and 18 this evening, and it's getting a lot more intense as we get towards the end of this book. So this is the chapter where Beth gets scarlet fever, and it seems that there's, as we know, there's always a very quick lesson to the girls' faults, and this one is probably the harshest consequence yet, I guess. So a lot of the girls have fallen into laziness. Now that their father's slightly on the mend, they're a little bit less worried. They are slipping out of their really good habits, and Beth is the only one to really keep this up, and as a result of this, she's the only one that continues to go and see the Hummels, which is the poor family from the start of the book. She's the only one that's kept going to see them, and she's asked for the girls to go with her and they don't. And then in this chapter she goes to visit them and they've all been sick and they've had the scarlet fever, and while she was there she was holding the baby and the baby passed away unfortunately from the fever, and so she comes home and she is obviously traumatized from that, which the other girls feel bad enough about for not being with her for that. But then it turns out that Beth catches the fever and she gets very, very sick, and they're all very worried about her, and then again learn this big lesson and wish they had have continued helping and continued going with her and not let her just shoulder all that on herself, because she's obviously still very young. And then in chapter 18 it just gets a lot worse. Beth gets really, really ill, and the other girls do step it up. They do everything they're supposed to. Amy goes away to stay with Aunt March so she doesn't get sick. Jo nurses Beth 24/7, day and night. Meg is keeping house and learning about, you know, all the cooking and cleaning that needs to get done, and really stepping up in keeping the household going. So they really do pull together for this and work together and do everything they can, and they spend a lot of time reflecting on how good their life used to be, and they had all these little trivial worries and things, but they really realised in this moment just how rich they used to be with their family and their health and their love and their happiness and their friends, and that really hits home to them, I guess, now that that's gone. They really realise how rich they used to be. This chapter just really moved me. I had a lump in my throat and an ache in my chest pretty much the whole way through it. And Laurie, bless him, he defies Hannah. So Hannah, their sort of maid, I'm not really sure what her official title would be, but effectively their maid. She's asked the girls not to tell Mrs. March that Beth is sick because she doesn't want Mrs. March to rush home and leave her husband because he's also very sick. So she asked the girls not to tell their mum unless it gets really, really dire. They all agree, but they are struggling with shouldering this burden on their own without their mother's help and guidance. And Laurie eventually decides to defy Hannah and write to Mrs. March and tell her the situation. And when he tells Jo that he's done this, she's so relieved. She gives him this giant hug. And you can really tell in this moment that Laurie's feelings for Jo are there and fully formed, and he is thinking along the romantic tracks for their relationship, but Jo is not there yet, bless her. I'm very excited. I feel like in this moment I am as equally excited as the girls for Mrs. March to come home. I'm gonna go to bed now, but I'm hoping when I wake up the chapter I read in the morning will be a lovely homecoming. I'm hoping the morning chapter will be a lovely sweet reunion and a homecoming for Mrs. March, and a lovely way to start the day. So I think she's telling me she's ready for bed, so we're gonna go to sleep now. That's chapter 19 done. We are getting there, so nearly finished. It was a pretty short and sweet one. We've just been seeing how Amy's been getting on at Aunt March's house, and I think, again, like the other girls, she's just got this whole newfound appreciation for how good her life was before, and she's been really heavily leaning on God for comfort during this time. And I think she's for the first time sort of independently found her faith and her religion rather than just practicing it with her family. It's been sort of her first, almost her first independent relationship with God, and discovering what that looks like and how that feels, and that's been quite nice for her even in this really worrying and trying time. And on the first page there was a passage that really reminded me of my grandmother. I think it was really like aptly put. It says, "Some old people keep young at heart in spite of wrinkles and grey hairs, can sympathise with children's little cares and joys, make them feel at home, and can hide wise lessons under pleasant plays, giving and receiving friendship in the sweetest way. And if that not just perfectly sums up grandparents or my grandmother anyway, yeah, it was lovely. I've just finished chapter 20 and 21. We are so close to the end now. Chapter 20 kicked off and Mrs. March is home. The immense relief of having the mother's love and support and guidance back in the home is so palpable for all the girls. They've been navigating this really difficult time with Beth's sickness alone, and now their mother's home and they can have that support and just relax a little bit and know that mum's gonna take the reins. Yeah, they're all so happy and it was such a touching reunion. And then Jo and her mother have a conversation about Mr. Brooks' feelings for Meg, and this is not a surprise to Mrs. March at all, because Mr. Brooke, or John as he's now known to them, has confessed to Mr. and Mrs. March how he feels about Meg and told them his intentions to make some money, get a house and propose to Meg once he has established himself. And they don't really have any objection to this because he's been so lovely and helpful to them. But the only thing they've said is obviously that Meg's a bit young, so they were wanting her to wait till she was at least 20, which is about 3 years away, for her to commit herself to anybody. And this is not really a problem because it's going to take John, Mr. Brooke, a few years to be able to put a household in place for Meg, so they don't have any objections to it. But Mrs. March has no idea if Meg returns these feelings that Mr. Brooke has, so when she comes home she's quite interested to see whether or not the feeling is reciprocated by Meg. And I think Jo was a little bit surprised. I think she was counting on her mother to sort of nip it in the bud and say, no, you're too young, this is not going to happen. And then obviously when Mrs. March says, well, not yet, but it will at some point, Jo is she's back to being really shocked and worried and a little bit angry that Meg might leave soon. And this also sort of hammered home the fact that at the present Jo does not have, or she's not aware that she has any romantic feelings or intentions towards Laurie, because she says to her mother that she was planning on or counting on Meg marrying Laurie and then Meg being able to stay really close to the family. So yeah, I expected by this point in the book that Jo would be a little further along with her feelings, or that something more would have happened between Jo and Laurie, but at the minute she's still not thinking about that at all. Was happy for her sister to marry Laurie and then for them all to just stay really close that way. But then in chapter 21, Laurie plays a bit of a prank on Meg because he's a bit disgruntled that Jo has been keeping secrets from him, even though they weren't her own secrets. They were secrets that her mother had asked her, more like confidences that her mother had asked her to keep. And Laurie's been feeling a bit disgruntled about this, and he plays a prank on Meg and writes to her pretending to be Mr. Brooke. And I'm not really sure what he was hoping to achieve by it, or why he thought it might be funny or like a good prank to do, because it was actually just pretty mean and Meg took it pretty harsh. Mrs. March came down on him really harshly, and so did Jo, and he was quite humbled and had to very sincerely apologise. But yeah, I just don't really get it, and I didn't think that Laurie would do something like that. He's always been very sincere and very gentle-hearted towards the girls for the whole book. So, you know, I know no one's perfect and everyone makes mistakes, but I really wasn't expecting that kind of thing from him, and it sort of made me think about Laurie a little bit differently. However, what we have learned from the prank is that Meg's feelings for Mr. Brooke seem quite established and quite certain, so I guess that's one thing we learned from the prank. And Jo, bless her, is very angry at Laurie for this prank that he's pulled on Meg, but she has seemingly learned her lesson, and although it's not coming super easy to her, she is really trying to not let the sun go down on her anger, so she does go after Laurie and make friends with him before the day's up after this prank gone wrong. So she's learning, she's growing and sort of trying to overcome her temper.
I finished it! Oh my gosh, I've just done the final 2 chapters. So in chapter 22, Mr. March is finally home. I was welling up for that whole chapter. It was so touching, and it's Christmas Day as well, so we have done a full year now since the start of the book. It's the next Christmas and he comes home for Christmas Day, which was such a lovely treat for the girls. It was such a moving chapter. And obviously we've been with the girls sort of this full year. We've seen them grow, we've seen them learn, but Mr. March has such a lovely conversation with them where he describes to them what he can see in them. And it's just such a lovely moment for the girls, because at the start of the book, what part of what they were talking about, not their only reason, but a big part of the reason why they wanted to really try and be good little women, was for their father. And then for him to come home and describe to them the changes that he can see in them, and what he can see that they've learned, and what he observes is different about them, is really gratifying for them all. And obviously you don't strive to be a better person for the external validation that you might get, but it is always very nice when someone that you love and respect tells you that they can see the goodness in you, and they can see how hard you're trying, and how much you've grown. So it was a really lovely, touching little chapter. And the final chapter, Meg and Mr. Brooke, John, finally discuss their feelings, and with the slight help from Aunt March, Meg is ready to admit that she has feelings for John and that she wants to wait to be engaged to him, and she's happy for him to go off and sort of establish himself, and that eventually they will get married. So that was a nice little ending for their story. I have to say, I did expect by the time we got to the end of the book for Jo and Laurie's relationship to come to some sort of a head, but perhaps we don't need it in this book. At least it's so obvious, I think, to us all that Jo and Laurie will be together. So perhaps we don't need it. Perhaps what we needed was the clarification on Meg and John's relationship, and the fact that Laurie and Jo will be together is just such a given that it didn't need to be said to round out the book. But now I even more so want to read Good Wives to find out if they get together. Presumably that will happen in that book. So let me know if you've read the books and you've watched the movie. Do I need to read Good Wives first and then watch the movie, or can I watch the movie without having spoilers for what happens in Good Wives? But I'm so glad that I have finished it. It was such a lovely book, such a lovely read, and I'm going to ruminate on my thoughts and feelings, and then we will sit down and have like a final review, final discussion of my thoughts and feelings.
Okay, I have taken some time to reflect, and these are my sort of overarching thoughts of the book. First of all, considering that it's not thick at all, I thought I was going to whip through this really fast, and it took me longer to read than I thought. I don't know whether it's because it's been a while since I've read a classic, so maybe I was just reading it slower than I normally read because it was taking a bit more thinking about, or whether it's just more dense than it seems. I'm not sure, but it took me longer anyway than I was expecting to read, which is not a problem at all. And One thing that I struggled with at first was how fast it skips through time. Even from one paragraph to the next paragraph, quite a lot could have changed. We could be in a completely different place or scene or something, and I suppose that's just quite different. I think modern books move a lot slower. This book is spanning over a full year, just over a year, and obviously it's not much at all. Whereas I think modern books, you know, you could have, this could be like a day or 2 days in a modern book. They move a lot more slower, so you're not used to these big time jumps. So for the first couple of chapters, I did find that a bit jarring and a bit hard to sort of get into it, because sometimes it would skip to a whole different place in the next paragraph, and I'd be like, well, you know, throw me out of the story a little bit. But you get used to that pretty fast, the pacing and the way it's structured. My biggest takeaway from this book is that I would absolutely love, and I will, give this to my daughters to read, probably when they're around 10. I think this is the perfect book for Little Women. Surprise, surprise. I think it's the perfect read for young girls as a sort of really, really good guidance for them. Like I've said multiple times throughout reading, it is chock full of just really good life lessons, but I think in a way that's not sort of really patronizing and overbearing. And because it's wrapped up in this beautiful, lovely story and this lovely world with these girls that you just want to be friends with so much, and most of the lessons come from a really loving and gentle-handed mother, you wouldn't read this and sort of want to rebel against it. I don't think. I'm not sure, but I will definitely be giving this to my future daughters to read around 10. I think it would be a lovely little thing for them to read and to start learning these lessons. I have been musing over which girl I think I am the most alike, and my obvious choice is to say Jo, especially in terms of interests. Obviously Jo is the bookworm, she likes to read, she likes to write, and that exactly aligns with my interests. The only difference, I think my younger self and Jo are very similar in the fact that when I was younger, I had this sort of notion, and I think this was quite a common thing for young girls. I had this notion that I had to, when I was entering my teen years, I felt like I was at a crossroads, and I felt like I could either choose to be pretty or smart, and I could choose to be feminine or taken seriously, and it did really feel like it was a one or the other situation. And I, as a young girl, much preferred to be taken seriously and to be smart over being girly and pretty, and it seemed like you couldn't do both. And if you were wearing pink and liked girly things, no one was going to take you seriously and everyone was going to underestimate you, and that seemed like the worst thing in the world to me. So I was sort of pushed away anything overly feminine and did not want to learn how to do makeup or spend too much time on my hair or care about what I wore, because I thought somehow that would mean that what was in my head wasn't as worthy or wasn't to be taken as seriously. And thank God I have grown out of that. Over the course of my 20s, I've realised it's absolutely ridiculous, and you can be feminine and soft and girly, and it's wonderful to be those things, and being girly and feminine is an absolute joy and a privilege. And of course you can be feminine and smart and be taken seriously, and if people don't take you seriously, then that's just on them, isn't it? It doesn't detract from my worth or value in any way. So thank God I've grown out of those notions. But I do think that's quite a common thing that young girls sort of experience as they are growing up. And obviously Jo was sort of going through the same sort of thought processes where she was rejecting being a woman. I think for her obviously slightly differently as well, because she was limited by the things that she could do, because she often says that boys get to have more fun, they get to read more things and do more different kinds of work and play more games and do lots of things that she's not allowed to do. But she also has these notions, I think, of wanting to do something with her life and wanting to do something important, and she feels like she can't do that if she goes too far down the road of being a woman and being womanly. So I think we're quite similar in that way, or my younger self was very similar to Joe. The only difference is that I was incredibly painfully shy and Joe is obviously quite outspoken and not really shy at all. So that's the only difference. But apart from that, I feel like I'm the most like Joe, or I was when I was Joe's age. Present self, I'm not really sure. Maybe a blend of Meg and Joe. I feel like my values and my wants are definitely changing as I get older. I'm currently much more interested in marriage and family and babies than I was when I was 17. So naturally that's changed. So yeah, I think currently I'm some kind of weird mix of them all. But if I had to pick one, I would say Joe is the one that I relate to the most and feels the most like me. I've also read quite a few books where the heroine has cut off her hair like Joe did, and it's often when she's sort of grappling with the same things, when she feels like she has to have this choice between femininity or either being a warrior, being a hero, doing something important with her life. There's often when there's those kind of conflicts with a female main character. I've read a lot of books where she will end up cutting off her hair, and I think it is such a big thing for women. Having long hair is so heavily equated to this sort of femininity and beauty and sort of youthful thing, and I feel like lots of women feel quite liberated and empowered when they've cut off their hair because they know they're doing it for themselves and sort of rejecting, I guess, what they feel like is being pushed upon them as to who they should be. I have cut off my hair a few times in my life, really short. I've gone from probably the same length as this to a really, really harsh bob, and it has felt quite liberating. It's either come from the result of a breakup or wanting to feel like I've drawn a line in the sand in a certain area of my life, wanting to move on from something or another, whether it was some kind of difficult event or trauma or even just leaving a job, moving. Sometimes hair, it just holds weight, doesn't it? It holds memories, and sometimes we just need to cut it off and start again. And I feel like it is a very powerful thing. My other thought is that I really enjoy having a classic book on the go, and I think I'm going to make an effort to keep one in my rotation going forwards, because I notice when I'm in the middle of reading it, a classic book, it somehow effortlessly elevates my own language. I think I naturally really absorb words and speech patterns and sometimes even accents, even though if you asked me to do an accent on purpose, I couldn't. But if I'm talking to someone with an accent, I kind of sponge it in and do it unconsciously. So I am quite a sponge for different speech patterns, and I think when I read classics it does filter in, and I notice when I'm in the middle of the book the way that I write in my journal or just writing emails, the words I use is different and the structure of the sentence is different, and when I'm speaking to people I feel like I'm talking a little bit more eloquently anyway and not using so much slang or so many ums or likes. And unfortunately it doesn't last for very long after I've finished. I sort of filter back down to, I guess, my more natural speech patterns, but perhaps that's an incentive to always have a classic on the go that I can dip in and out of in the middle of my other reads, just to sort of help me to speak a bit better, I guess. I don't know if anyone else experiences that. So if you have read Little Women, I would love to know what you thought of it. I'd love to know which girl you think you're the most like. I'm currently debating whether I want to run this through the core pile system and give it an official star rating. If you've never heard of it, the core pile rating system is basically a way of giving the books that you've read a rating out of 5, which is a bit more standardized than just going off your gut feeling at the time. And I do love to do that with books that I've read, but I don't know, it just feels a little bit wrong to do that to a classic book, especially one as lovely as this. So I don't know if I want to give it my official rating. In my heart, it's a 5-star read. It's touched me so much. It's so lovely and wholesome, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I I might just stick with loving the book and not giving it an official rating. I don't know. So I will close out here. I hope you enjoyed this super cozy read with me. Let me know if you have any recommendations for books either similar to this or just anything that you think I would enjoy reading, and what you would like to read with me in another video. Okay, thanks for watching, guys, and do all the good stuff. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. It really does make a big difference, and it makes my day every time I get a comment or a like. Do a little happy dance. So, you know, do all the good stuff, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Okay, bye.